Daniel C. Dennett. Consciousness Explained. Redefine your understanding of the mind and consciousness. From Descartes' mind-body problem to modern neuroscience, the question of consciousness has long been shrouded in mystery. A revolutionary philosopher challenged our understanding of consciousness, the very essence of being, by questioning its existence as an elaborate illusion. This provocative idea could reshape your understanding of yourself and your place in the universe. This blink explores how the brain might construct multiple versions of reality and why your sense of self could be more fiction than fact. This new perspective on consciousness not only changes how you view your mind, but could also transform your understanding of humanity's role in the natural world. Be prepared to question your deepest assumptions about what it means to be you. Challenging the Cartesian theater, the nature of human consciousness has intrigued philosophers, scientists, and thinkers for centuries. From ancient Greek musings on the soul to modern neuroscientific explorations of the brain, we've sought to comprehend the essence of awareness. Despite significant progress in brain science, the mechanism of consciousness remains enigmatic. In the 17th century, René Descartes proposed that the mind and body were separate entities, connected by the pineal gland. This concept of a central control point in the brain persisted for centuries, hindering our understanding. As neuroscience progressed, researchers eagerly sought this seat of consciousness, expecting to find a specific region where our experiences converge and decisions are made. However, as we learn more about the brain, the idea of a central consciousness hub began to crumble. Different aspects of our experience, sight, sound, emotion, memory, seem to be processed in various parts of the brain, often simultaneously. In other words, no single center of consciousness could be found. In the absence of a clear scientific explanation, humans have clung to intuitive models of how our minds work. The concept of the Cartesian theater, a modern myth born from our struggle to understand consciousness, suggests that somewhere in our brains, there's a tiny you watching the movie of your life unfold, making decisions and experiencing sensations. It's a comforting notion that aligns with our subjective experience of having a unified self. But what if this intuitive model is entirely incorrect? Philosopher Daniel Dennett challenged the very foundation of how we think about consciousness. He argued that there is no central viewer in our brains, no singular point where consciousness occurs. Instead, he proposed that our experience of consciousness is more like a constantly edited, crowdsourced conglomeration than a unified self. Consider a moment when you've been startled by a sudden noise. Your body reacts instantly, heart racing, muscles tensing, before you're even consciously aware of the sound. By the time you think, "What was that?" This, Dennett would say, is evidence that there's no central you calling the shots. By dismantling the Cartesian theater, Dennett opened up new ways of thinking about consciousness. He challenged us to see our minds not as singular, unified entities, but as complex systems of parallel processes. This view might seem unsettling at first, but it also offers exciting new possibilities for understanding. The multiple drafts model. Having dismantled the myth of the Cartesian theater, Dennett proposed a radically different way of understanding consciousness. The multiple drafts model challenged the notion of a singular, coherent stream of consciousness, long believed by humans, in favor of a chaotic inner turbulence of competing realities or interpretations of events. To illustrate, imagine your mind as a bustling newsroom, with multiple reporters and editors working simultaneously on different stories. There's no single authoritative version of events until a story goes to print. Similarly, Dennett argued that our brains process vast quantities of information in parallel, creating multiple drafts of our experience. These drafts aren't neatly ordered or centrally coordinated either. Instead, they compete for dominance, with the winning draft becoming our conscious experience. This process happens continuously and so rapidly that it gives the illusion of a smooth, unified consciousness. Consider the phenomenon of the phi effect in vision. When two dots are flashed in quick succession a short distance apart, we perceive a single dot moving from one position to the other. Surprisingly, if the second is a different color, we perceive the dot changing color midway through its illusory movement. How can we see the color change before the second appears? Dennett argued that this demonstrates the brain's editing process. Rather than faithfully recording events as they happen, our brain constructs a coherent narrative after the fact, filling in details retroactively. This model had profound implications. It suggested that there's no single moment when something enters our consciousness. Instead, consciousness emerges from the ongoing process of narrative creation and revision in our brains. Ultimately, it opened up new ways of thinking about memory, decision-making, and the nature of self. If our conscious experience is a constantly edited narrative, what does this mean for our sense of free will or our understanding of personal identity? The multiple drafts model invited us to see our minds as complex, dynamic systems constantly constructing our reality. It suggested that the seeming coherence of our conscious experience is itself a construction, a kind of final draft selected from many competing versions. By framing consciousness this way, Dennett pushed us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and our understanding of ourselves in even more ways to come. The hard problem of consciousness. Long after Descartes proposed his dualist view of mind and body, the mystery of consciousness continued to perplex scientists and philosophers alike. As neuroscience advanced through the 19th and 20th centuries, researchers made significant strides in understanding brain function. They mapped regions responsible for movement, speech, and sensory processing. However, the fundamental nature of conscious experience remained elusive. This persistent puzzle came to be known as the hard problem of consciousness. How does the physical brain, with its neurons and synapses, give rise to subjective experiences? Why do we have an inner mental life at all? For example, if you imagine biting into a lemon, you can easily picture the yellow color, feel the texture, and almost taste the sour flavor. But how does your brain create these vivid, subjective experiences from mere electrochemical signals? This is the essence of the hard problem. Faced with this conundrum, many thinkers retreated to religious or spiritual positions, claiming consciousness might forever remain beyond scientific explanation. Others proposed elaborate theories involving quantum mechanics or yet undiscovered properties of matter. However, Dennett, as a philosopher, approached the hard problem from a radically different angle. He argued that the very notion of a hard problem was misguided. In Dennett's view, once we explain all the functional aspects of consciousness, such as how we process information, make decisions, and report our experiences, there's nothing left to explain. Dennett likened consciousness to a magic trick. Just as a magician creates the illusion of impossibility through misdirection and clever techniques, our brains create the illusion of a unified, subjective experience through complex information processing. This perspective was deeply controversial. Critics argued that Dennett was simply sidestepping the real issue. How could any amount of functional explanation account for the raw feel of consciousness, the what it's like of having an experience? But Dennett held firm. He suggested that our intuition about the hard problem stems from our limited introspective access to our own cognitive processes. We can't directly observe how our brains construct our conscious experience, so we assume there must be some mysterious extra ingredient. By challenging the very premise of the hard problem, Dennett opened up new avenues for investigating consciousness. He encouraged researchers to focus on the observable, functional aspects of the mind rather than chasing an elusive, subjective essence. The role of language in consciousness. While many theories of consciousness focused solely on brain processes to explain self and subjectivity, Dennett took a unique stance by emphasizing the pivotal role of language in shaping experience. He proposed that language wasn't just a tool for expressing thoughts, but a fundamental shaper of consciousness itself. For a moment, imagine a world without words. How would you conceptualize complex ideas? How would you plan for the future or reflect on the past? Dennett argued that language provides the scaffolding for higher-order thinking and self-awareness. He introduced the concept of the Joycean machine, named after the stream of consciousness style of writer James Joyce. This machine, Dennett suggested, was a software upgrade to our brains, enabled by language. It allowed us to narrate our experiences, creating a rich inner world of thought and reflection. Consider how you might describe a sunset to yourself. The words you use, like golden, breathtaking, or serene, don't just label the experience, they shape how you perceive and remember it. This internal narrative, Dennett proposed, is the very stuff of human consciousness. But Dennett went even further. He suggested that this linguistic self-narrative wasn't just a reflection of consciousness, but its very essence. Our sense of self, he argued, emerged from this ongoing internal storytelling. This view suggested that consciousness, rather than being a mysterious, innate property, was largely a product of cultural and linguistic development. Our conscious experiences were deeply influenced by the language and concepts available to us. This perspective also offered new insights into animal consciousness. While animals might have rich sensory experiences, Dennett proposed that without language, they lack the kind of reflective narrative consciousness that humans possess. By placing language at the center of consciousness, Dennett bridged the gap between neuroscience and cultural studies. He invited us to see our inner lives not just as the product of neural firing, but as a complex interplay among biology, language, and culture. This linguistic turn in consciousness studies opened up new avenues for research and sparked debates that continue to this day. It challenged us to reconsider the nature of thought, self, and the very essence of what it means to be consciously aware. Heterophenomenology, a new approach to experience. To delve deeper into the implications of Dennett's groundbreaking approach to studying consciousness, we must first grasp the concept of phenomenology. Developed by philosophers like Edmund Husserl and later Maurice Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology is the study of conscious experience from the first-person point of view. It aims to describe what it's like to have certain experiences, focusing on the subjective, lived reality of consciousness. However, this introspective method faced a significant challenge from the start. The experience of consciousness is as personal and subjective as consciousness itself. Enter Dennett's innovative solution, heterophenomenology. Heterophenomenology, meaning the phenomenology of another, was Dennett's attempt to bridge the gap between subjective experience and objective science. Imagine you're a researcher trying to understand what it's like to be afraid of spiders. Instead of relying solely on brain scans or behavior, you'd ask people to describe their experience in detail. You treat these reports not as infallible truths, but as data to be interpreted and analyzed. Dennett argued that by carefully collecting and analyzing these verbal reports, along with other observable data, scientists could build a comprehensive, third-person account of consciousness. It's like being an anthropologist, studying an unknown culture, taking indigenous beliefs seriously without necessarily accepting them as fact. This method allowed researchers to sidestep the problem of direct access to others' minds. Instead of asking, what is it really like to be conscious? Scientists could ask, what does the subject say it's like to be conscious? Once again, Dennett's approach was revolutionary. It provided a way to study consciousness scientifically without getting bogged down in philosophical debates about the nature of subjective experience. By treating conscious reports as phenomena to be explained, rather than explanations in themselves, heterophenomenology opened up new avenues for research. Critics argued that this method might miss the essence of consciousness by reducing it to verbal reports and behavior. But Dennett countered that any scientific study of consciousness must start with observable data. He believed that by carefully analyzing these reports, we could uncover the underlying mechanisms of consciousness. Heterophenomenology had far-reaching implications. It suggested that our intuitions about our own consciousness might be flawed or incomplete. Just as we can be mistaken about the causes of our behavior, we might be mistaken about the very nature of our conscious experiences. Consider the last major decision you made. Did you feel like you were in control, weighing options and choosing freely? Dennett argued that this feeling of free will, while very real to us, might not be what it seems. In his view, our decisions emerge from the complex interplay of competing drafts in our brains, rather than from a central, controlling self. This doesn't mean our choices aren't real, but it suggests that the process is far more intricate than our subjective experience implies. Dennett compared our sense of free will to a benign illusion, like the impression that the sun moves across the sky instead of the Earth turning. Just as understanding the Earth's rotation doesn't stop us from experiencing sunsets, recognizing the complexity of our decision-making doesn't negate the importance of our choices. As for personal identity, Dennett proposed a radical idea here too, offering the self as a kind of center of narrative gravity. Much like the center of gravity in physics, which is a useful abstraction rather than a physical point, Dennett saw the self as a convenient fiction our brains construct to make sense of our experiences. Imagine writing your autobiography. As you weave together memories and experiences, you're not just recording your life, you're actively creating your sense of self. Dennett argued that this process happens continuously in our minds, shaping our identity moment by moment. This view challenged traditional notions of a fixed, unchanging self. Instead, our identities are fluid, constantly being revised and updated like the multiple drafts of our conscious experiences. These ideas had far-reaching ethical and social implications. If our decisions emerge from complex brain processes rather than a central, controlling self, how does this affect our concepts of moral responsibility? If our identities are ever-changing narratives, how should this influence our legal and social systems? By reimagining free will and selfhood, Dennett invited us to reconsider fundamental aspects of human experience. His ideas continue to challenge our assumptions and spark debates about the nature of choice and selfhood today. In this Blink to Consciousness explained by Daniel Dennett, you've learned that a philosopher challenged our long-held understanding of consciousness by proposing that it's not a unified entity, but a collection of competing drafts of reality in our brains. He argued that language plays a crucial role in shaping our conscious experience, and that our sense of self is a narrative construction. The concept of heterophenomenology offered a new method for studying consciousness scientifically. Dennett's ideas have profound implications for our concepts of free will and personal identity, inviting us to reconsider what it means to be conscious and to have a self. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. Please take the time to leave us a comment and a like. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.